email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Our guest today is someone who's obsessed with the science of teamwork. Shane Snow is an award-winning journalist, entrepreneur, and the best-selling author of several books, including the one we're focusing on today, Dream Teams, Working Together Without Falling Apart. And that's not easily done. So in it, Shane unpacks what sets extraordinary teams apart, from cognitive diversity and intellectual humility to the surprising power of constructive conflict. If you're a leader looking to build a culture of innovation, or simply someone who wants to be part of a team that doesn't get along but gets better, this conversation is for you. Shane's insights are rooted in storytelling, research, and real-world examples that challenge the way we think about group dynamics. So let's get into it, Shane. Without that, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me on the conversation.
And as I was talking to you off air, I have to tell you, this has been one of my favorite books I've ever read. You're a great storyteller. And the journey you take us on in this book, you know, we go around the globe. We're in Moscow. You're in Russia. We talk about sports analogies, even though you say you're not a sports guy. We did. I learned about the Wu-Tang Clan. I mean, just fantastic job, Shane. Kudos to you, man.
Well, that is the most flattering way you could start an interview. Thank you for the compliment. As a writer, I mean, you know this, as an author, it's different than, you know, if you perform on stage, you can see people's reactions to your art or your work. As a writer, you don't see people's reactions. You maybe see some reviews, you know, online, and I ignore them. But it's nice to hear what a reader has to say, and I thank you so much for having read it and enjoyed it.
Yeah, when I teach classes, the same thing happens. I love the feedback you get from in-person classes, and when you go to virtual, nobody turns their cameras on, and you don't get any feedback. Am I doing good? Am I not doing good? Are they getting it? Not getting it? Is it funny? Is it not funny? It's hard.
Yeah. Yep. It is one of the interesting, I think, dynamics. I mean, you know, you deal with teams as one of your main things as well. It's an interesting shift in team dynamics as this move to remote and hybrid, of being able to gauge the nonverbals of your team and see if they are getting what you're delivering. That can be really hard, you know, when you're not getting the nonverbals because you're lagged, or cameras are off, or someone's looking over here because that's where their camera is. So you can't tell if they're, they are absorbing it, but you can't tell. And, we, as humans, we pick up a lot of those cues. I think, now I'm just going to start rambling, but I think it's one of the reasons humans kind of won planet Earth is we're so good at picking up those nonverbals. It's what allowed us to work together in the first place.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we don't lose that as we get more technology in our lives.
We got to make a point not to, for sure. I was watching CBS Sunday Morning, I think it was, and they did an interview of an actress from England. I don't remember the name, sorry. But she was talking about being a stage actor in England and then being a stage actor in New York. And she says in England, the audience is much more reserved, but in New York, you really get the energy in the room, which is quite different. And then she's a director on films as well. She was talking about it's just as exciting for her as the New York shows, but it's different in film. So it's that interaction, that positive reinforcement, or sometimes negative. You know, you're on the wrong track. You got to shift gears.
Yeah. Yep. You got to adapt, and the signals that let you know either you got to adapt or you're on a roll. Those are really helpful. Yeah,
they really are. So let's start off. I like to think of all my guests as superheroes, and all superheroes have an origin story. So what's yours?
Oh, wow. I don't know that I quite qualify compared to your other guests and to other superheroes, but my origin story, I grew up in Idaho. My dad's an engineer. He worked first on cars and then eventually at the Idaho National Laboratory, working on nuclear reactors and fuel canisters for spent nuclear fuel. So I grew up with this very kind of engineering sort of education at home, take things apart, see how they work. He, call my brothers and I into the garage and be like, hey, this is what, transmission looks like. It's what I'm doing. I'm taking it apart. So I grew up with very much this kind of, this sort of learn how the world works and ask how the world works sort of mentality. And he put us to work on a lot of projects, flipping houses and construction and things that at the time I, hated. And now I look back on it and I say that was part of what shaped my my ability to think about like what's behind, the facade, in the world around you. How do things work on the inside, or wanting to know those things. And then my mom was, she was a teacher for the deaf. And then my family had 7 kids. And so eventually very quickly, she couldn't hold down a teaching job. So she just taught us 7 kids. And now they have, I think, 15 grandkids. So my mom's a teacher and instilled in us a love of reading and learning. And I think that I just feel very lucky, if anywhere that I could be born in the world. I was born in, sort of a boring spot in Southeast Idaho to 2 parents who really put a lot of emphasis on learning and allowed me to go anywhere I wanted to be. I wanted to go. And I think, could have been born anywhere. Could have been born in an exciting city like New York, where I eventually moved to, or could have been born somewhere without educational opportunities or without, 2 parents who could teach me that. So I think that's really what I owe it all to is that. And then I think, being curious about the world allowed me to I think take the career path that I've taken and I think make the kinds of mistakes that lead to growth rather than kind of getting stuck. And there's lots of everyone experiences trials and tragedy and trauma, and I think that I have, because of that setup of my parents and kind of how just sort of I grew up, I've been able to have post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress, which again, I feel very fortunate about. It's certainly not my doing. I was set up to be able to do that.
I was going to say that your background, well, my dad was not an engineer, but I grew up in rural South Carolina. And I think that you're a team guy and I'm a team guy. And I think one of the things that both of us experienced was I know I did, that my dad was a serial entrepreneur. So I got a chance to meet and work with a lot of different people at a lot of different social levels and that thought differently. And so that forced me to understand how to communicate with, the mayor of the town, or, as I say in one of my books, the town drunk, right? Because they would come into my dad's liquor store and buy stuff. So you had to be able to communicate with everybody. And it's a great skill to have.
I think it's a really interesting point, right? No matter where we grow up, we can fall into this sort of easy thing of just associating with and communicating with people who are very similar to us, have similar interests. And I think this is actually, there's business research from decades ago that I think led a lot of, the corporate world on the wrong track, which is research that said that people who have similar interests to you and similar lives, you're going to get along with better at work. Well, it turns out just getting along with people better and having the same things to talk about that you're interested in doesn't mean it's not actually the best thing for a team. Sports being an easy analogy, and like you said, I'm not a sports guy, but sort of obvious. If you have a basketball team and everyone is exactly the same, you're probably going to lose to the team that has players with different specialties. Someone who can shoot 3-pointers, someone who's fast, someone who can block better. If everyone has the exact same style, that's an easy team to defend against. And so it goes in business, and I think in communities and families. I have a big family, and we have different personalities, but we have a lot in common, and we benefited a lot from associating with people who were not exactly like us. And I think that's where, especially when I moved to New York as an adult, where I had the big aha moment of just meeting people from every walk of life who are all there to make it or to make something of themselves, or prove something to themselves, and realizing that there's more than one right way to do that, and there's more than one right way to say something. People speaking all different language all from around the world, and my way of saying things and thinking about things isn't the only right way to say or think about things. Embracing that, I think, has certainly it led to a lot of the premise of my book Dream Teams. But it's sort of what you're saying. If you can have a conversation with the mayor and the town drunk, first of all, that ability to approach and adapt and see the humanity in everyone and speak like human beings is just the right way to roll. But second, you're going to learn something different from both those people, and that's going to enrich your life and probably your work.
And it all comes back to we're all people in the end, right? We're all human beings trying to survive another day. So what inspired you to write this book?
There were a few things. It's my 3rd book, and each book that I wrote was sort of like a years-long process of me being interested in a set of topics. I was a journalist for a long time. When I went into business, I was an entrepreneur kind of in between spouts of journalism, and I would write about these things that interested me. I would use journalism as an excuse to meet people and interview them and learn from them. And I found myself kind of with this collection of themes and topics that were really fascinating to me. And my agent kind of described it as by the time you're 2 books in, your agent's saying, what's your next book going to be? What ideas do you have? And he told me that as we were having these conversations about what I was interested in, what I was writing about, just, on LinkedIn or for Forbes or for Fast Company, he described it as kind of the classic chipping away at the marble to find a statue inside. I was chipping away at these ideas and eventually honed in on what I'm really fascinated by is this idea of teams are the way that we accomplish anything that we can't do on our own. And very often the promise of a team does not sort of get fulfilled. I think back to school projects, you have 4 people assigned to do a project. There's the one who does all the work. I feel like that was me. There's the one who, does nothing and shows up on the last day. There's the one who kind of is there, but not helpful. And it's like, I could have done this project on my own. And of course, then there's some teams where obviously you can't do it all yourself, so in construction, you need lots of people one person is not going to lay the concrete foundation for a house, right? You need lots of human power, to accomplish the job. But it doesn't mean that you're moving faster because you have more people. Usually it means you're moving slower. And so at the same time, there's these classic stories in history, and in movies certainly, and I had seen it in my own life where it did feel like a team added up to more than the sum of their parts. It's that classic synergy thing, that Stephen Covey talked about in the 90s, right? Like 1 + 1 can equal more than 2. And so I was interested in this idea that sometimes that happens, but usually it doesn't. And yet we need teams. And so, my angle as a journalist had been psychology and neuroscience and human behavior as applied to business. So I had been looking at these different facets of, what is it about how we work together that allows us to do this and sometimes not? The other thing that was kind of in this sort of chipping away at the marble, actually where I really got started, was I became pretty fascinated with research about immigrant behavior, and sort of started with noticing the stat that cities in the United States that had more immigrants tended to have more patents than cities with a lower percentage of immigrants, and sort of goes from there. More small businesses, more entrepreneurs, more fear of crime, but not necessarily more crime. It's actually not correlated. More immigrants doesn't necessarily mean more crime, but it definitely means more small businesses. So I was interested in kind of that research of, people are afraid of people that are not like them. So, creates this sort of different dynamic, often with more fear. And yet there's something about people moving to a new place that leads to innovation. And then I started looking at that same idea kind of outside of sort of physical immigration and in sort of, I guess, in industry immigration, someone who works their way up as, say, an engineer, like you, and then moves into project management or moves into, game design or even politics. And what is it about? There's many, many cases where that is exactly the thing that leads to like a great breakthrough in an industry, is someone coming and applying their knowledge and expertise from some other industry. So kind of this intellectual immigration. And sometimes it doesn't apply at all. An engineer that, becomes a botanist might, ruin all the plants or whatever, or they might invent, a new way to keep plants alive longer or whatever it is. I'm making things up. I had some very specific examples that I was looking at, on game theory and on actually the invention of the super soaker by a guy who was an expert in basically fluid dynamics to help satellites move around in space and applying that to toys. So I was writing about these kinds of things and various case studies of that kind of behavior, and I realized that connected with this team thing of, amazing teams that do add up to more than the sum of their parts will tend to have people who have different journeys, who are bringing different mental models and mental tools to the team, and that gives the team more potential than just having people who are all the same or all think the same. After that, you have to do something with that. You have to execute. You have to not fall apart. but that was the inspiration as I was writing about these topics and following these threads that I realized tied together around this idea of breakthrough teamwork.
Well, interesting aside, I've met the guy that invented the Super Soaker a couple times.
Yeah.
He's in a
Lonnie.
group that I'm in Atlanta, so he's a fascinating guy. And in
I
your
love
book,
this story. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And then in your book, kind of building on what you were talking about, when you have multiple people come in, you have immigrants come in, you have more innovation. You mentioned that, and there's like neuroscience around your brain wants to put people into groups. And basically, you're a part of my tribe. I trust you, but you're not part of my tribe. Innately, I don't trust you because I don't know you, and you might be out to get me. And then you talked about, it was another thing about voting, actually. If you have a homogenous group, they vote less than if you have the other way around. I think you said you have a diverse group, they tend to vote less. But if you have a homogenous group, they all vote they all vote. So it's interesting how that all plays a role.
And some of this is you ask why. Basically, for me, I hear these stats and I want to know why. What is it about, a community that has lots of people from lots of different groups that would make them want to vote or not? Like, it should be like voting should be this intrinsic thing. Like, your self-interest is to elect someone who's going to be good for your family and community. Yeah. And, one of the things kind of along those lines that I rarely talk about this chapter in the book, but there was this time in the early 20th century when in Buenos Aires, Argentina, there was this particular influx of immigrants from Europe and moving to Buenos Aires. And in particular, there were a lot of Jewish immigrants. And initially you saw, it's one of my favorite kind of case studies in history of this. Initially, what they saw was a lot of fear, a lot of people, sort of like even violence, but certainly like bad sentiment towards Jewish people in Buenos Aires, and kind of all immigrants. There were also a lot of Arab and Muslim immigrants. There were immigrants from kind of every country in Europe, but particularly it was the Jewish immigrants that kind of got a lot of flack from the local community. And it wasn't because they were committing more crimes. It wasn't because of anything, that you could put your finger on of like, oh, there was this bad story of a Jewish person, so now everyone's afraid of the Jewish people. It was just that they're different. They speak differently. They pray differently. They don't go to the same, it's a very Catholic country. And it sort of the neighborhood started to segregate, right? There's the Jewish neighborhoods, and they they moved together for kind of safety and just to be around people that were like them. And then what happened was something really fascinating is soccer started to get popular in Buenos Aires, and little Jewish kids would play soccer in the street with little Argentinian kids and other European kids from who were immigrants. And street soccer was the thing. It was like very poor neighborhoods. And when people saw their kids playing soccer together, it let sort of the pressure out of this sort of, balloon or ticking time bomb. And then adults started playing soccer together. And, Buenos Aires, for years and years, it may still be the case, had the highest percentage of people who play amateur soccer, in football clubs of any city in the world. It's the national religion became soccer, not Catholicism.
Yeah.
And what you see in the statistics around fear, around hate crimes, all of it went down. And the Buenos Aires now has the largest Jewish synagogue outside of Israel, I believe, or it did at the time I was writing about this 7 years ago. And the Pope hosted giant soccer tournaments in Argentina and talked about how amazing it was that their Jewish brethren were able to to be such great neighbors to them, and it was because of this game. And I wrote all about that in the book and was fascinated by the psychology behind that.
Mm-hmm.
How does that make sense? Soccer doesn't equal like suddenly we don't care about our differences in religion. Suddenly we're not afraid of people who we don't understand. And it didn't equal like Catholics going to synagogue and Jews going to Catholic church. It didn't really equal people like getting interested in each other's religions. It just made people see each other as human beings, which allowed them to work together, which allowed them to make their communities better and the capital city better. And so, yeah, again, it's sort of a long way of getting around to saying it. But when you look at history, you see these examples of humans really doing teamwork right and overcoming, crazy problems or inventing crazy things. And you see lots of examples of it not going well. And underneath kind of those examples where we really beat the odds and, and transformed people's lives, you see these team dynamics that have to do with the psychology of in groups and out groups, who's on my team, and am I working for the team or am I working for myself, and, not working with them or working against them. And that's one of the building blocks, I think, of teamwork with trust is if you can turn your back on someone and they're not going to stab you in the back, you can get a lot more done.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that you can learn that you can turn your back on someone is by playing. And, play is sort of the simulation of, of conflict where it's actually okay. You can play soccer with someone, for months, you're going to trust them because you see them as a human being and you see how they handle themselves in adverse situations, and you don't even realize it that you can turn your back on them and it's okay.
I never thought about that as an analogy for trust, but yeah, I guess it kind of is. You learn how people are going to play, whether they're dirty or not dirty. Are they fake injuries or not fake injuries? Are they
for sure?
The sportsmanship or not? Although in soccer, everybody fakes injuries, but
well, soccer's a funny example now because it has become over the last, I'd say, the first half of the 20th century was, all this stuff I'm talking about that, the soccer hooliganism and sort of crazy fan culture has definitely turned it into a bit more of a vicious game on the sidelines, which I don't love. But I will say you go to a bar anywhere in the world and you can start talking to someone about soccer and make friends with them. And that says something, I think, about human psychology.
Even if you don't even if your team is the opposite of theirs, they still share that bond of soccer.
Yeah.
They may make jokes about your team, but at least you're talking about the same sport, right? So
yeah. And the thing to click on this a little bit further, the thing that you see where that situation in the bar when you're talking about soccer goes badly is when you have a group of people who are like all the same. They're like, this is our group, we support this team, and the one or two people who are on the other team, and the strength in numbers, we are our group, you are the others, can turn into the fights. One-on-one, two people with very different, opinions on who's the best team can get along so much better than when the groups get bigger and we start to take sides. And it becomes this battle rather than this kind of intellectual conflict or, conflict of opinion that is fun, that could lead to, productive, understanding or, maybe even interest in someone else's team. I think that's where, the in-group, out-group thing comes together again. When we start to team up and say, they're not on my team. So this is not a fun conversation. This is a actual battle.
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind. I was working on a project in Brazil for the FIFA World Cup in 2014, I think it was. I think that's right. And obviously I'm in Brazil, so most of the team is Brazilian. We had one guy from Argentina on the team. And that poor guy, man, because Brazilians and Argentinians don't get along when they talk about soccer. But so they gave him a really hard time. But at the end of the day, though, they were in the same company. So they all worked together. So he was still part of the in group, as you call it. But boy, he was definitely on the edge.
It's too bad because I can see that it's, he's on the team for a reason, right? He's adding something. And I'd say probably adding something a little extra by being the only one that's kind of outside of that core group. And certainly when they go to a match in Senegal, like he's more on their team than when they're in the locker room, right? It's that classic proverb, me against my brother, me and my brother against my cousin, me and my cousins against the neighbors, me and my neighbors against, the other town. It's like that classic thing. Yeah. I will say, thinking about, what do we take away from that for, running a business or running a team of our own, even say, a soccer team, if you can create an environment where there is no one clear, overwhelming majority, that actually allows for a lot more productivity and less of the sort of not constructive conflict. If there's sort of a plurality of groups represented and everyone feels like they're on the one big team, but it's not like 80% of us are, clearly this group and the 20% are this group, you end up being able to have a lot more productive conflict rather than, kind of the picking on people or the things that aren't productive.
Yeah, for sure. Let's shift to a different sport for a moment. even though your book's not on sports. In the book, you do quote an organizational psychologist who says virtually all studies unambiguously reveal that individuals outperform teams in terms of both quantity and quality. But then in that same section, you give this example of that kind of seemed to disprove that with the Russian hockey team, also known as the Red Army, that dominated hockey for decades. But when they eventually broke up and moved into the NHL for different teams, they didn't really help their teams win. They weren't as good. Individual statistics weren't really good. But then the Detroit, I think, Red Wings in the mid-90s kind of got the band back together and put them all on that team, and that they won back-to-back Stanley Cups. So, what gives there?
Yeah, a great question. So that quote that you started with, it's specifically talking about brainstorming, about when you're trying to come up with ideas to solve problems or, creative ideas, but usually it's about problem solving. Study after study shows that if you compare two brainstorming methodologies, one is individuals get a group of people and say, brainstorm ideas on your own about how to solve this problem. The other methodology is you get all those same people in a room together and say, brainstorm together on how to solve this problem. Very consistently, like overwhelmingly, kind of on average, individuals who brainstorm on their own, come up with ideas, do their own thinking, and then meet and combine their list of ideas will outperform the group that brainstorms and works together. And there's other places where this that dynamic happens. It's a lot of areas of collaboration where one person doing a job is going to be more efficient than a bunch of people doing the same job, usually. And yet there's these moments like this hockey story that you're describing where actually it's not the case and it's rare. So in the story of the Russian hockey team, it's during the era of the Miracle on Ice, which that's that famous movie, is the time when the U.S. Olympic team beat the Soviet Olympic team in hockey. And it was a miracle because it wasn't supposed to happen because the Soviets had destroyed everyone for years. And what happened is the Iron Curtain fell. Russian hockey players were now allowed to go and get very high priced jobs at Canadian and American hockey teams. So they all sort of split up. But there's this dream team of Russian hockey players that just beat everyone for years. Then they all went their separate ways and got these huge salaries. And none of their teams did really well in the NHL. And then the Detroit Red Wings got the old gang back together, or kind of the main sort of starting lineup back together, gathered these players from these different teams again until they had the core of the original team. And then that team, like you said, won Stanley Cup, destroyed everyone once again. And, and there's kind of some magic to that particular configuration of hockey players. They, perhaps you could say, using the brainstorming analogy, if you put them in a room together, they would come up with better ideas together than they would have if you had them brainstorm on their own. Clearly, them on their own on other teams wasn't as good as them together. And so that's actually kind of the opener to the Book Dream teams, is sort of the question of why. What was it about their team dynamic that allowed them to overcome this tendency for humans to not, to underperform, I guess you could say, their potential when we're together for necessary reasons versus when we're alone. And, my core hypothesis is that it was the way that the team was incentivized and trained to work together. They had two very different instructors. They had this sort of militaristic, drill sergeant-like coach who was super strict. Doesn't sound like someone I'd want to work for, but super strict. And then they had this other coach who was very creative. He made them take dance classes. He made them take karate classes. He made them practice doing like ninja rolls, all of this stuff that, had nothing to do with hockey training.
While on skates, if I recall, in your book.
Yeah. While on skates, it took them out to the fields too to do ninja rolls, but they had ninja rolls on skates. And so they had this a diversity of physical training and of mental training that, other hockey players didn't have. And they also had this thing that was just a function of the way that the Soviet Union worked, which was they weren't getting paid if they made more goals or not. They were getting paid the same regardless, but their success, they stayed on the team. They got the perks of being, the Russian hockey team if the team won. There was no, you made more goals or you made more saves, so you get to go to a better team, you get a better salary like you had in the United States. And so when you were at this decision point of, do I pass the puck or do I go for the goal? There wasn't even this subconscious thing of, in America, you'd have this subconscious choice of, if I go for the goal and I get the goal, that's good for my stats, which eventually is good for me and my money and my reputation and all of that. And on the Soviet hockey team, there was none of that. It was, is it more likely that I make the goal or that he makes the goal if I pass it to him? So they had more passing. They had more actual team interplay than other hockey teams. And that was, it was that combination of things that allowed them to make it work. There was no extra glory if you were the one who saved the day. It was the team's goal only. So I think, that story is not about saying that communism is the best economic system for the world. It's not that at all. It's saying that the incentive structure of a communist hockey team led to the team winning being the most important thing, not your individual success. And that individual success is often what gets in the way of these group dynamics. So say in the brainstorming exercises or other exercises or situations where this inefficiency occurs, like you pointed out, you might hold back an idea you think that people will ridicule if you think that it will reflect badly on you. You might be more quiet. You might second guess yourself. Even if we say no idea is a bad idea, you might not explore an idea that sounds like a bad idea if you think that your status in the group is going to be at risk, even just a little bit, even subconsciously. If you're rewarded by being right, you're going to think twice about what you say or what you do, and you're going to try and take credit for when things go right, and you're going to try and deflect credit and not look at the full picture when things go wrong. And yet, if you can take that away, if it's like, hey, us actually getting the best idea is the thing that matters, the only thing that gets you kicked off the team is if you don't speak up, if you don't put forward the bad idea. That is what leads to those outcomes. And there are many successful teams that come up with great ideas brainstorming wise, but it takes a particular configuration and dynamic to make it work.
It's kind of what you talked about on the Russian team. When I would inarticulately call chemistry, right? There was some chemistry there. And you say it in the book, the best teams don't just work together, they think together. So what does that look like in practice? Because we just talked about that if I'm brainstorming, I get better ideas if I brainstorm alone. But now we're talking about that we need to think together. So what does that look like in practice?
Yeah. So I think the starting point, and the reason I wrote the book the way that I did, with kind of the intellectual journey in these stories and these questions and kind of surprises, is because I'm convinced that the first big thing is actually just becoming convinced and remembering that these natural human tendencies work against us. Once you know that, hey, let's call a brainstorming meeting, that chances are that's a worse idea than just saying everyone brainstorm on your own. Once you know that, you're going to be much more deliberate about how you organize and how you get people to think together. So I think specifically, one of the things kind of tactics wise that I recommend all the time, I do a lot of consulting and speaking and kind of getting down to sort of very specific scenarios with companies, around this stuff. And one of the things that I recommend is, before you have the group meeting where you're going to discuss the decision you're going to make, or, you're going to discuss ideas, as a leader, take time to have one-on-one deep dives with every person who's going to be in that meeting. So you can extract more knowledge, more ideas. You can push people to dig deeper before they're in front of the group, where there's going to be those social dynamics that could lead to suboptimal outcome. It's sort of like it's seeding the conversation, but it's also, you can have a much more vulnerable, much more interesting conversation with an individual one-on-one where they're not worried about what everyone else is saying. As a leader, you can say, I have this idea that I think might be a bad pitch. I want to run it by you. What do you think? And, people might be hesitant about, is this a trap? If you're a person in power, but you do that enough, you reinforce that, and eventually people relax and you can start to go really deep. And you can even say things like, so I thought this was the way we're supposed to go, and I realized I'm wrong. I'm trying to figure out what a better solution might be. And I'm open to anything. Like, can we explore some ideas that you have, even if you don't think that they'll work? Like, maybe we can explore that. And, and other sort of rhetorical sort of tactics, like when someone does say something that doesn't make sense or isn't going to work, say, why don't we explore that? What if that were true? What would happen? And kind of go down the rabbit hole with them. Doing that one-on-one with everyone who you're going to bring together first will lead to a much more productive conversation. So you're going to have that permission to, to speak up with things that, might otherwise be held back. And you're also going to come with a bunch of ideas that brainstorming has already kind of been done. you're thinking together one-on-one, and now you can think as a group and sort of whittle things down, have a debate, which is, the team game. In my opinion, the best kind of debate is the team game of let's find the flaws. Let's poke holes in this together. It was your idea. Tell us what could be wrong with it. Not, it was his idea and let's all pick on him, kind of as a team working through that. So the thinking together, sort of a long answer to your question. A shorter answer would be thinking together goes better when it's more of a explore and debate process than a sort of question and answer process, and a sort of an idea and who's right, let's pick one process. And we tend to sort of naturally have the incentives wrong for that, right? The incentive is to be the one that has the right answer. The incentive is to be the one who doesn't have the wrong answer. The incentive isn't to say the thing that's dumb in front of everyone. And so that's I think the dynamic to be flipped. And like I was saying earlier, it helps if there's no clear majority group in there. Because if you're, the one person representing some group, say it's you're the one designer in a group of engineers, or you're the one, minority in a group of people who are all, the same in some way, you may feel pressure not to be wrong, extra pressure not to be wrong, because you're representing the entire design team, or you're representing that entire group, or you're the one woman in the boardroom, right? You don't want to say the wrong answer because you don't want this false narrative of, oh, it's because she's a woman, right? And so you feel this kind of extra psychological pressure. So yeah, that's why I think the tactics of depressurizing, the tactics of stocking the team with enough diversity in every kind of form that you think will help, so that people are not going to feel like they have to have this other motivation to stay quiet, or to have to be right, or to have to defend their position. The team winning being the most important thing should mean none of that other stuff matters. But inside of our little lizard brains, it tends to matter.
So one thing you said that I think is important for me, at least, was because when I first was thinking about this, I work with a lot of teams, and I don't think people are lazy or procrastinate, but they have more than they can possibly do. So I was thinking that if I asked them to come up with a list individually and then show up in the meeting, they're gonna write down 5 things on the way to the meeting, right? Not really think about it. And so the way you just combated that was you had the one-on-ones in advance, which is going to force them to think about it before the big meeting where everybody's together. So that's one key point that I took away. The second one you brought up was the debate thing. And in the book, there's a quote from somebody, I can't remember who it was, about the best people are the ones who can hold both sides of the argument in their head at the same time. And that's really what you're talking about is, you have this, if I create this idea, then I'm going to be really defensive when you say, let's poke holes in it. But if you say, Clint, this is your idea, so tell us what you think the flaws are. Now I get to poke holes, and then other people can join in, and it's okay. So from a safety perspective, I think that's a better way to go, like you were talking about.
Yeah, it kills 2 birds with one stone, right? It makes your ego protected, right? You're the one finding the flaws, so you're still the smart one. You're still okay. And so it protects that, which just is going to make things go better. And it also, it helps you to explore, I use this idea of teamwork and problem solving is like exploring a mountain range in the fog. I use that analogy throughout the book. You can explore more of the mountain range if you're sort of pushed into looking at things from a different angle. And looking at things from the angle of someone who might try to shoot your idea down is going to help you see other things. And that is, it's also very satisfying, right? To have the aha moment of like, once again, like you're smart, like, oh, I see this now. That's great. And, with the holding both sides of one thing, I think like one of the main things that I end up talking about with real teams or real companies since publishing the book is this truth that all of the success and hard work and brilliant thinking that got us to this mountaintop that we're at can all have been great and awesome, and changing to do something new, to climb a new mountain, can also be great. And it doesn't mean that all of that stuff before was wrong. It might just need to be different now, but what got us here was right, and it's fine. And we are great. And we are smart. And we are successful. But that success and that thinking like, well, we were right and we were great can get in the way of seeing that there's another way now. And and it's ironic. It's actually not like our flaws. Well, it's a psychological flaw, but it's not like our lack of smarts that gets in the way of getting to that next level. It's actually the fact that we're smart gets in the way.
Yeah, I think the best I've ever seen that done is one of our clients. They do these strategy sessions when they go on for weeks, and they'll take one group and say, okay, you're the competition, so you go build a business case, and you go, why your product's going to be better than ours, and we're going to come back in, and we're going to defend it, and then we're going to switch roles, and so it's really eye opening what you get out of those. And people, it's funny because people, they'll work for company A, and yet they took on the role of company B, and they start to defend company B, and they get really angry. It's like, wait a minute, no, we're the better product. And no, you're not. You work for us, remember?
That's great. Well, I was glad to hear that you said that there's the switch in the middle, because that's, it's human nature. Like we get invested, we get emotionally invested.
Yeah.
In our work and in being right. And if you're forced to take the other side, you have to let go of that emotional investment. And that reinforces that, like, oh, this exercise really is about finding the right thing, not me being right.
Well, that concludes part one of my conversation with Shane Snow, award-winning journalist, entrepreneur, and best-selling author of Dream Teams, Working Together Without Falling Apart. Coming up in part two, Shane runs down some of the biggest misconceptions around building high-performance teams, including the idea of culture fit.
This notion of culture fit, we've been taught that culture fit it's one of the things that leads teams to go from good to great, right? And culture, healthy culture, leads teams to go from good to great. But culture fit, I think, is this sort of insidious thing, because we can interpret it as everyone needs to be similar or the same. And this person who's going to provide a skill to the team, but is different than the rest of the team, we shouldn't hire them, is the exact wrong advice.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.